ESPN Radio 1080, The Team.
ESPN1080.com presents Round 3, your show for MMA and news and up-to-the-minute breaking news and notes. I'm Eric Lopez alongside Carson, Ingle, and our MMA guru, Brian Wininger. And boys, even though there's no card this past weekend, there's still a lot of news to get to, isn't there?
No, you're talking about breaking news. I mean, we're sitting around our computers all day, hour after hour.
Stuff keeps popping, and then it just keeps going and going, and the news gets bigger and bigger as the day goes on.
No, it was ridiculous. I mean, especially in these last couple hours, we went from Brock Lesnar and Alistair Overeem, the two of the most compelling heavyweights in the world, being booked, inked, everything signed and done for December 30th.
Well, that's the big story, top story. Brock Lesnar is back. He will fight in December 30th in Las Vegas. Your reaction, Brian, first of all, we've kept hearing about him. We 2 weeks ago, we talked about him making that video. Oh, he's healthy, he's back, and this and that. But yet, everybody was thinking, well, he'll come back next year in 2012. In fact, Dana White, in the press conference when they announced the Fox main event, which we'll get into later on the show, denied, said there was no truth to the rumors that Brock Lesnar was retiring. So we go from that to now where he's going to fight on December 30th. Are you surprised it's this soon?
Well, actually, I'm not, because after hearing Dana White, he actually corrected some of those naysayers and said, dude, look, Brock has been working on a farm out in Minnesota for the last 3 months. The guy's healthy, and obviously he's healthy enough to fight this year. I think it's perfect. It's perfect timing for this fight, because Alistair Overeem obviously just inked a new deal with the UFC, and they're going to put those two guys together, which will be for the number one contender spot that'll face the winner of Cain and JDS.
The big question, of course, Overeem, of course, for those that don't know, tell this backstory to him.
Overeem is he's been one of those heavyweight fighters who has been judged up there as one of the best in the world, and one of those guys who have never been in the UFC. He's a stand-up kickboxer, big K1 guy, but everywhere he goes, Strikeforce, he dominates guys. So I'm excited as a fan that now this guy gets to test his talents against the best in the world, and that's only in the UFC.
And the key with him, I think, right now is just that he's on a little bit of a roll. He hasn't lost since 2007.
Yep.
So, right now, he's almost stepped his game up and is on a kind of run that have people putting him in a pretty lofty spot among the top heavyweights in the world. Now he gets to come and test his merits in the best place for him to do so, and will he live up, and will he be able to? I mean, this is a very interesting fight for both guys, because we don't know what we are going to get out of a Brock Lesnar who has been off for so long and is coming back from injury. So for both guys, this is a very interesting fight, and whoever wins, they get directly vaulted to a title shot.
Yeah, and it's just such a polarizing fight, because these guys too are honestly the biggest guys in the division. Overeem was quoted as saying, "You're going to see these are like two dump trucks coming at each other. You're going to see that. It's going to be these two big brawlers meeting in the center of the octagon." And the thing with Overeem, he's a striker, and that's what gave Brock Lesnar problems against Cain. Cain's striking ability to pick and move under the pockets and just really dominate Brock Lesnar. So I hope his stand-up game is worthy, because it's going to get tested in this fight.
Now they picked December 30th. That's a Friday night, not a normal night.
No, not normal at all. That shocked me.
Now, why do you think they picked that night? They did not even have anything scheduled in Vegas originally. Now, as you guys know, and you can go into it, there's a big event going on New Year's Eve in Vegas.
Right.
They're scared of our boy, TJ Austin, man.
Our boy TJ Austin's doing the big air jump 2012. He's actually going to jump a 747 airplane in Vegas. But I think they chose Friday, obviously, because they didn't want to compete with New Year's Eve. And Carson and I were talking about Friday nights. We were thinking that might be the second Fox card, which doing the top two heavyweight fights back to back on those Fox cards would have been great. But after looking into it, it's actually a pay-per-view.
Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense for them to put two fights so close together, seeing as they've only got the four for the year, and we were always told that there was only going to be one for the culmination of this year, and then in 2012 those 4 fights a year would start. So I was kind of confused when we tried to figure it out.
Well, and from the business standpoint, the UFC, you have to put Brock Lesnar on a pay-per-view card. He is the guy. Look at the numbers. He's the guy who drives those pay-per-view buys.
That's true.
So I think that it's a no question. You got to have it in Vegas, which they are, and it's got to be on pay-per-view. But yeah, Friday night.
So again, that will be a Friday night, December 30th pay-per-view.
Pay-per-view.
Not Fox.
Not Fox.
Ooh, big pay-per-view, and rightly so. And let's talk. And we talked about this, you and me, Brian. I mean, before this even came out, about UFC needing Brock Lesnar back because their last handful of pay-per-views have kind of been, still good by pay-per-view numbers, but kind of stale in the numbers.
Right, you got the numbers there.
The last pay-per-view, 134, according to Dave Meltzer, is going to project to about 265 to 300,000 buys. 133 did 310,000 buys. 132, 350,000 buys. It's been consistent from 130 to 134.
Plateauing a little bit there.
It has plateaued.
Yeah.
You got to go back to UFC 129 when George St. Pierre headlined that one, had 800,000 buys. Pay-per-views this year overall in UFC are down from what it was last year, and it's massively down from 2 years ago when Brock Lesnar was involved. And, of course, you mentioned Brock Lesnar. His last fight, over 1 million buys. He is the man that can draw 1 million buys. And I don't have any doubts, even for his return fight, the hype that's going to come with that, they needed him big time because he is the only legitimate star that they have in the sport right now.
The legitimate mainstream.
Yeah.
It comes back to all combat sports, including boxing. You need that big heavyweight American fighter, and that's what Brock Lesnar is. And by the way, he's got great personality, great marketability.
I don't know. He has an interesting personality.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's a great
personality. No,
it's not.
But it's not. In fact, he's. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, it's just it's a huge fight, and it's. We talked about this too. Kevin Aioli made the great point on the Beat of Sports that even though the UFC is gaining in popularity at a rapid rate, the stars that boxing has in Mayweather and Pacquiao, the UFC
does not have.
Nationally don't have stars like that.
Lesnar is the closest. I saw SportsCenter mention Brock Lesnar, so they clearly like Brock Lesnar.
Well, that's the interesting thing. How much do you think that Fox will help develop stars, and then who are the guys I think that can gain the most out of that in terms of building star power?
Well, I think absolutely Fox is going to gain that because they're already talking about they're doing the promos for UFC events during college football and NFL Sundays. So right then and there, you're going to get that exposure.
I think we sort of believe that maybe like a John Jones gains the most from that, and then maybe a Jose Aldo, who's a young guy,
Right. Jose Aldo, I don't know if he can be the same star, but absolutely, John Jones, he's a guy with a great personality, unlike Brock Lesnar. Good-looking kid, 24, dominating, well-spoken. He's the guy that I would choose to market that. And of course, you got George St. Pierre in there, and you got a bunch of guys, but Fox ultimately will help accomplish that.
But here's the problem: two things. Number one, does Dana White really want a big star? Because in MMA, as you know, Brian, anybody can get beaten on any moment.
Right.
And if you build someone up, they lose a fight, they crash.
Well,
that runs the risk of losing business there.
Right, but I think at the same time, the way the sport works is that the guys who beat those champions, who dethrone these great guys drawers, they instantly become those.
Does it though? Because
you don't. When I look at it, I don't think you have a choice but to develop stars. It's a cyclical thing. It isn't a team sport. You can't really sell, like the NFL. The NFL sells the team. They sell the franchise. You can't do that. You have to sell the individual. So you don't have a choice but to develop stars. I think that's a risk that you take, and that you get hit with, and you get rewarded with when guys go on big streaks like an Anderson Silva has, like guys will do in the future. It's a risk-reward.
I think Dana White would disagree with you, though, to a certain extent. If you think about it, UFC's always the brand. People are interested in the brand of UFC. There's been other MMA promotions that have had great fights, but nobody cares about Strikeforce or Pride back in the day when it existed, or the International in Japan. It's UFC. Dana's made that brand very big. So if you're in UFC, you matter.
Right, and that's exactly the point I was going to make. Yeah, Dana White, sure, he does want stars. He does want eventually to develop that. And of course, he would love to have big name fighters, and he does. But ultimately, it's about him growing his sport and his business in the long run. And I think the star development will be a part of that eventually. But I think his mindset and his ultimate goal and passion right now is just the sport, and everything else will take care of itself.
So you mentioned John Jones as possibly that next guy. I'm not sold completely yet. I don't think he has the personality that it's going to draw people. Do you have give me a couple other names you think?
Well, I mean, Frankie Edgar is a good fighter. Dominic Cruz, he's going to be a new
exciting guy.
Yeah,
that's always key, I think, in building stars, is getting that guy that's got an exciting fighting style, and then that's certainly Dominic Cruz.
Yeah, Dominic Cruz is excellent fighter. It's just so hard because you've got your guys like Anderson Silva, who is the best fighter in the world, but he's Brazilian, barely speaks English, and it's really hard to market guys like that.
Well, and he's
in the
36
States.
now, so
right.
His time is he almost came too early to sort of catch this new wave. And certainly, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that the continued growth and the network deal will grow his popularity too,
right.
But in terms of what some of these younger guys can do, I think they can gain more from this.
Right, we're entering that. I mean, it's a stage 3, if you will, of the UFC. The first stage was with a Chuck Liddell, Tito, Randy. Those were the main superstars. Now the second stage was Anderson Silva. GSP is still on top, but that crop of fighters. Now you're getting in Dominic Cruz, John Jones, all these new up and comers who are moving that. Taking the...
Does the next star need to be an American? We've talked about this. That's been the complaint
Yes.
in boxing. Oh, there's no American heavyweights. There's no this. Does the guy have to be an American?
Yes, I think so.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
Yeah, and if you're talking about that superstar that carries the brand name, yes. Absolutely, and it's John Jones. I think it's John Jones. Ultimately,
you got to start watching some John. We got to get some John
You
Jones
guys are
interviews
confident
rolled
he's
up.
just going to run over Rampage, huh?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yes. He's going to dominate Rampage.
He dominates. He puts people in the hospital.
He's
trust
good.
me.
Oh, dude, he is ridiculous. He's a phenom. He's only been fighting for 3.5 years.
I guarantee you, after that fight, you will be a believer. You're going to come in here. You're going to preach the greatness of John Jones.
I mean, it's his biggest fight, right? Would you agree to this point?
Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, now he has the belt. Every fight's going to be his biggest
all
fight.
eyes will be on him.
He dismantled Shogun.
Yeah.
Shogun dismantled Forrest Griffin. I mean, he's just scary. He's so athletic. No one can compete with him athletically, and his reach and just where he comes from with all of his kicks and punches. You can't figure this guy out.
Oh, he's tremendous talent. But will the casual fan relate to him? And that's something we'll probably get into next week because he's in September. He's going to fight in a weekend with football heavy, college football, NFL. You got the big Mayweather fight in September. Will that fight draw? His last fight you mentioned against Shogun drew about 400,000 buys, which is pretty good,
right.
But not like a monster number like a St. Pierre or a Lesnar, not a clear superstar. Can this fight make him that?
It's going to help. It's not going to make him that. I think what's going to help him making that is the way Fox and the UFC promote him.
I think it will draw a little bit more just because of Rampage. I do think Rampage helps because Rampage is a name, he's a known commodity, he's a character, he's a personality, and that, I think that fight will drive pay-per-view buys a little bit better at least.
It's going to be interesting. How much Lesnar fight, though, do you agree will be a big draw? Will draw the biggest, probably UFC number buy rate?
Yes.
Buy rate?
Yeah. That will break records because it's by December 30th. Everyone they're gonna see the November 12th card on Fox. Those casual fans who haven't bought in the sport, so you're gonna have that. So and then on top of that, like you mentioned, SportsCenter, ESPN really loves Brock Lesnar.
They do.
That guy's on talking to everybody. So I think that's going to help, obviously, promote it.
And I'm sure Fox will do some specials for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's countdown shows. It's definitely going to be the biggest fight. And Brock Lesnar, I think he's going to be in trouble. I think he's going to be in trouble in that fight.
I agree with that as well.
I disagree, man.
I just think his stand-up was so exposed with Cain Velasquez. And
Yeah.
Alistair Overeem, he's probably the best striker. I mean, him and Junior Dos Santos are probably the two best strikers in the heavyweight division.
He could be.
And, physically, he matches up with Brock. So I think he'll be able to stuff the takedown.
Well, we got a few months to
we do.
dissect
We do.
that.
At this hour, though, Brock,
I hope he's not listening.
this isn't a gimme.
Brock, if you're listening, because we're pretty big on YouTube, that's Brian
Email
Wininger.
Eric Lopez at Nightscast.
Lopez at ESPN1080.com.
He's the one who told me to say that. Sorry, Brock.
Yeah, sure. That's going to be fun. It should be interesting. And remember, he is a former football player. You know how Fox likes to kind of do that cross-promotion where hey, it's so-and-so from, that 70s show is watching the Eagles game. Don't be I could see Brock Lesnar at an Eagles game. So, all right, we're running along. We're going to take a break here on the episode of Round 3. When we come back, some other big news in UFC. There's just more of them leading up to some big cards coming up here, folks. You're listening to ESPN1080.com's Round 3 here on ESPN 1080, The Team.
ESPN Radio 1080, The Team.
And welcome back to ESPN1080.com's Round 3, your show for all news MMA. Eric Lopez alongside Carson, Ingle, and, of course, the MMA guru, Brian Wininger. Brian, where they can find you on Twitter?
Find me at ESPN Dub.
Dub. Gotta love Dub.
At ESPN Dub.
Carson, where can they find you on Twitter?
Give me a Twitter.
C.A. Ingle. I-N-G-L-E.
What about you?
I'm Eric Lopez Elo, and as we mentioned in the previous segment, you can actually do email me on, E. Lopez.
Yeah, let him have it, dude.
ESPN1080.com.
We'll bring you up.
We love you, Brock. I love you. Carson and Brian, not so much. I just want to throw that record out there.
Oh, don't lie.
I love Brock Lesnar. I'm just trying to keep it real.
Keeping it real. You know where we're keeping it real is on ESPN 1080 Insider Show, Sunday mornings, 10 to 11. Carson, we had a heck of a show this past Sunday.
We had a great show.
And we'll have another one this Sunday. We're going to recap the Boston College UCF football game, week 1 of the NFL. You're going to tune in on ESPN1080.com Insider Show Sunday mornings, 10 to 11. All NFL college football.
It's
Who
back.
knows?
Football's back, baby.
We may get another Tim Tebow call. I mean,
You probably will.
I think that's a pretty formidable option. Of course, you got your own little thing going on Saturdays now, don't you, Brian?
I do.
You're everywhere.
Roger Franklin Williams talking old school mentioned Tim Tebow. We have a Tebow Truth segment.
That's why I mentioned
Yeah, 11:30 to 12 on Saturdays on ESPN The Team, 1080 The Team. Yeah, we pretty much defend Tim Tebow. Not that he needs defending, but we pretty much point out, give the guy a break, give the guy time, let him develop, and don't bury the guy. Pretty much don't bury Tim Tebow right now. All this opposition is completely burying the guy. Let the guy develop. But
I love Tim Tebow as much as the next guy, but he's kind of grandstanding right now and taking our MMA show away.
Right? Yeah. Tim Tebow hasn't fought MMA. So.
He hasn't been in the octagon.
Screw him.
No, but there's some fighters that have been, and they're not grandstanding. And Carson is going to tell us about some big ones.
Maybe grandstanding here. We're going to see what happens. Matt Hughes, Diego Sanchez was scheduled for UFC 135, the co-main event. Now Sanchez broke his hand, so he's out for the fight. Josh Koscheck has stepped in, has agreed to fight Hughes, but now Matt Hughes has not really agreed to fight Koscheck yet. So we're sort of 19 days out from this thing, and we're just kind of waiting for Matt Hughes. So he is kind of grandstanding a little bit, and this is sort of Matt Hughes fashion, too. He's a little bit of a drama queen.
Well, the ball's in Hughes' court. And how this thing went down, actually, Joe Rogan tweeted Dana White when Dana broke it on Twitter, and then Koscheck came in and told everybody he's got to fight in 21 days, which coincidentally is that same card that Hughes is fighting. So pretty much right now we're putting the pieces together, but Koscheck is the UFC's, not only is it really their only option, he's their best option at this point. It's so hard to, I was looking at the list, like Mike Swick, Paulo Thiago, would that be an interesting fight? Thiago Alves already destroyed Matt Hughes a couple years ago. So Koscheck right now is the one who can come in there and bring it to Matt Hughes. And then of course Koscheck just coming off of his title shot against GSP. The winner of that Hughes Koscheck fight, they're in the mix. So I think it worked out. It's gonna be a pretty exciting fight.
Do you think it'll happen?
Yeah, definitely. Because
Hughes has got to accept,
who else?
though. I think,
but
he's
who else,
been temperamental in the past. It doesn't really, I could see him just trying to be difficult and prolonging this thing and forcing the UFC's hand in it.
Right. I don't know. I think the UFC and Matt Hughes have the kind of relationship at this point in the game where they'll make something happen. Everyone's going to win in this. And Matt Hughes is a fighter. He's still fighting at this age because he loves to fight and he wants to fight. And I feel Matt Hughes wouldn't duck anybody. But
to Carson's point, he's got leverage here, right? He doesn't have to.
No,
he could take his time and say, I'll do it under my terms. And that's kind of a dangerous, kind of going back to that first segment, by building up stars. And I'm not saying Matt Hughes is that, but I'm just saying an example of if you build a guy big time enough, he has a chance to kind of control some things in the sport, and now you're at a bit of a disadvantage. I mean, this is a minor example, but he could say, no, not until you meet my terms. What are you going to do if you don't? We're going to find someone else.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, really, that, that Hughes is even still a factor right now in the organization. I mean, this is a guy that had his peak quite a while ago now. He's 4-4 in his last 8. Now, there's been a couple really formidable opponents in there, but I'm kind of surprised that he's still able to be a co-main, and maybe that's kind of another point of progression that we need to see the sport take to get away from, the guys like Tito Ortiz and Matt Hughes being there in big fights just because they're old names that can draw big numbers, that there needs to be more development of guys that can kind of take their place.
Yeah, those guys definitely benefit on their name and what they've done in the past, but at the end of the day, they're not going to fight unless they win, or at least be able to still compete. And Matt Hughes can still compete to a level. I'm not saying I know. I'm not saying he's going to be the next welterweight champion or even fight for a belt. I'm not saying that at all. But he's one of those mid-range guys who can fight a Koscheck, who can fight a John Fitch. Yeah. Who can fight those guys, who can be kind of that benchmark where these new and up and coming fighters. If you get past a Matt Hughes, then you've got a name. So that's, and the UFC's always been accustomed to doing things like that. So, we'll see. But ultimately, the UFC, their hands were tied with everybody's scheduling, and it's just so hard. You have such a small window to make these fights happen when these guys get hurt. And I think Koscheck, filling in is just as good as Sanchez, if not better.
Wow, that's pretty good. And then, of course, the other big announcements we thought we were going to open the show with, but Brock Lesnar said, no, we're going to talk about me first, buddy. Fox, of course, last week, we mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show, announced its main event. Yeah,
main event, Cain Velasquez against Junior Dos Santos, November 12th. Carson, you were right. They brought a title fight on that first card. I'll give you the props. But yeah, nice. They came with it, and now Ben Henderson is just inked a deal with against Clay Guida on that card, which is the rumors. But what we've been talking about before is that it's only an hour show.
It's a 1 hour show, so it's only the main event. Yes. Dos Santos will be on Fox.
Yes, but all the reports are saying that Ben Henderson and Clay Guida are going to be on that card, which is a remarkable fight. I think it's a great fight, even though Clay Guida destroyed Anthony Pettis, and Anthony Pettis, of course, destroyed Ben Henderson with that Matrix kick off the octagon wall, 5th round of a title fight, the most ridiculous thing you'll ever see in your life. But UFC's gonna find a way. If it's not on Fox, it's gonna be on FX, Facebook, whatever. They're gonna find a way.
Now, Carson, you kind of have a bit of an issue with the fact that Fox will only carry the one fight. You would have liked to have seen more fights.
I think 2 or 3. I'm not asking for the whole main event. I'm not asking for any undercard fights. I'd just like to see 2 or 3. I think that's more of an appropriate number than just throwing one fight out there and saying, here, this is all you get.
No, I agree with that. And that's kind of what the UFC has done that boxing used to do all the time. You would go and you would pay for that Mike Tyson fight, and it would last 15 seconds. And the UFC has been always great at, sure, maybe your main event is not a good fight, but we're bringing you 3-4 excellent other fights to compensate for that.
And I think what will happen if the Velasquez-Dos Santos fight goes short, they will run another fight after that, something that was pre-recorded,
which they've always done.
Which might be the Henderson-Clay Guida fight. You never know.
If that one ends quick and they can fit it in,
No, but I agree with you. I would have liked to seen at least 2, 3 would have been the best. A normal card has 5.
But how much? I think this was network. Networks don't want undercards. They've never liked undercards.
Right. But they have to realize that this isn't boxing. I mean, this is a different thing.
Right.
The way that they've created this and built this is to showcase fighters coming up through those other fights, and then they build their name recognition. That is basically one of the main reasons that the UFC's been successful.
Well, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Fox pregame is going to be like. The hype, and exactly what they do to build up to that fight. That's going to be the most interesting part of that.
The problem is the networks want control, and you can't control a card that's got 3 or 4 fights in an hour. You run over. You want to make sure you get back to your local news. That's where they're going to come from. They want to guarantee one fight. It's either going to go short and they'll fill it, or it's going to go the distance and they'll fill up they're going to be on schedule. And unfortunately, I think the majority audience doesn't care about the undercard. I think your diehards, like ourselves, will watch it. But I think the casual fan that Fox is hoping to get on prime time Saturday is not going to watch.
In some undercards, you can have a fight right below the main fight that's featuring two guys who are contenders for a title. So, I mean, this isn't like we're throwing a bunch of random guys that no one's ever heard of out there.
I don't think they care.
Right. But I think to Eric's point, Fox is trying to get those people that haven't. They don't. I mean, they might not even know who Brock Lesnar is, or even Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos are.
Plus, if you're Dana White, why would you want to do a double main event on free television when you can do that on pay-per-view and make more money?
No, I mean, you don't have to do a double main event, but I'm saying there's plenty of fighters that aren't that far of a drop-off in name right now than Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos, who could be on that card.
I just think audiences are going to watch that fight. And here's the other aspect of it, because I think I'll be one of these people. I'm going to watch that main event, and then I'm going to go somewhere else and watch the Manny Pacquiao fight.
Right. That's going to be a good night of fights. And look,
which is why Bob Arum is an idiot.
I know.
Right? Can I just throw? I just want to throw that.
Yeah. No, please.
Dana would appreciate that.
Well, because it was a stupid argument. I know this is old news. You guys, you covered it on Beat of Sports with Mark.
Yeah,
it's about how he's upset about how this is, going to interfere with the Pacquiao fight, which is most the stupidest comment ever.
No,
they're completely different times. If you're going to watch the Pacquiao fight, you're going to watch the Pacquiao fight.
And if you're out somewhere already watching,
watch both.
You'll watch both.
Yeah,
right.
There's no doubt because UFC cards normally don't start till 10 anyways, and they go till 12, 12:30. Now this starts a little earlier 9 o'clock, and boxing will be right after it.
Yeah, it's a double dip.
Well, sure.
Yeah, Bob Arum's a complete idiot.
Right.
The fact that he thinks that there's only UFC fans and they just watch UFC. There's only boxing fans and they just watch boxing. No, it's two different sports. It's really two different deals. And like we all said, we'll watch UFC on Fox, and then we'll watch Manny Pacquiao fight because it's two different. I love boxing. I love MMA. You can love both. Go figure.
That's a good segue, Brian. That's why you're a smart man, because, speaking of that, next week we got a special ESPN1080.com Insiders boxing preview. We're going to preview the Floyd Mayweather fight, Brian. You're going to be on that.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And we might have a big-time guest. Actually, we'll have a big-time guest.
We may have some big-time guests. It'll be myself, Brian Wininger, and then our friend of ours, Jared Rudolph from Real GM, big boxing guy. He's the Brian Wininger of boxing.
Really?
I think so.
That should be fun.
So I have a feeling you two may disagree on a few things, but that's okay. That'll make it fun. So you're going to want to tune in on the website next week. And, of course, we'll have round 3 next week. We have a big guest for that. Who that is, you're going to have to stay tuned and find out. You're not going to believe who we got for next week's round 3. It's a major guest, isn't it, Carson?
It's from the mothership.
The mothership. That's a hint. That's a hint.
That's all you need to know.
Yep.
We'll find out who that is next as you're listening to round 3 on ESPN 1080, The Team.
ESPN Radio 1080, The Team.
We welcome you back to round 3 on ESPN1080.com. Here is Eric Lopez alongside Carson Ingle and Brian Wininger. Big guest coming up next week. We're going to tell you shortly who that is. And, of course, Brian, where can people find you and kind of compliment on your work?
At ESPN
Or dog his work.
Or dog it, yeah. You can do that. You can email me at bwiniger@radiogenesis.com.
There you go.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Going email route there.
I like that.
Yeah, or, we post this thing up on YouTube.
YouTube, baby. Send your comments on YouTube. We'll get them back.
We're not perfect, but and honestly, comment. Good or bad, I want to hear from you.
Positive, negatives, absolutely.
And, no matter what, I appreciate you for listening.
And this is not, believe it or not, it's not the exclusive show that Brian is on. A lot of MMA coverage on this show, on this site, on the station, as we're leading up to that Jones-Jackson fight. You're going to want to keep it here on ESPN 1080. I know that Mark's going to talk about it on Beat of Sports 9/11. Brian, you're going to be involved in that. I know Mark's going to ask you all those questions.
Yeah, every show we can possibly help to...
Tracy Dent, he's already you're his go-to guy.
Really? Dent, dude.
Tracy Dent talking.
I have Tracy Dent talking MMA.
You know what? You are an amazing force for this sport, Brian Wininger.
And that's honestly what all I'm in it for, to be honest.
There you go.
To help progress this sport to where it deserves to be.
Tracy
That's
Dent,
all I want.
Fridays 1 to 3 for Fridays on ESPN 1080. He's gonna hit you up. You're his guy. He said he's not even gonna call anybody.
You know,
he's not gonna call any analyst. He's gonna call you. That's all. He's just gonna, and you're right there.
You
So
know,
it's beautiful.
well, I'll pick that phone up and I'll answer that call, Elo. I'll do that
Beautiful.
for the sport.
All
and
for the
you.
sport.
And for you.
Well, thank you. Yes, and the Insiders, we'll cover that fight as well that week. We'll probably book you if you're not big time enough by then. You'll book you on the 25th.
You guys are the one that gave me that platform to start
That's
it up,
correct.
so I appreciate that.
It's a beautiful thing. And who knows, if you guys are in Vegas for the Lesnar fight.
Oh, that'll be epic.
Big weekend for you guys that weekend. Lesnar fight, and then you guys you were going to go to Vegas anyway.
Big air jump.
Yeah, TJ Austin's jumping a 747.
TJ's got some competition now.
You know, hey, the more the merrier in Vegas, man.
You think Brock Lesnar will go to that?
I want to see Brock Lesnar on a motorbike jumping a 747 after he wins. We can make that happen.
Can it? Really?
We
that powerful?
Bring worlds together.
Carson knows TJ Austin personally.
That's actually, Brian actually knows TJ Austin personally, but that's all right.
Wow, that's good. You guys are tight. Well, speaking of bringing worlds together, Carson.
Yes.
UFC is bringing the world together in a different way, aren't they?
That's a good point. UFC Japan, the other news that's broken recently, they're going back to Japan for the first time in over a decade. It'll be on February 26th. And obviously, this is very similar to what they just did in Rio, where they go back to a country that has deep origins in the sport, great respect for the sport there, and they're going to, it's maybe a tougher sell over in Japan, but I think that they're going to do a good job over there getting it ready and continuing. This is more not a short-term thing. This is a long-term thing to try to get to the goal of making this the world's biggest sport. And so I think they're trying to sort of put out their feelers in different places and really get the sport, going basically everywhere.
Brian, what do you think of that?
Well, that's exactly their goal. I mean, and eventually they're going to be in China at one point. So they're looking to take over Asia, South America, Europe. This is a global sport. Dana White he has this perfect saying where fighting translates no matter what. In America, you see a ball hit over a wall or dunked in a basket, we give meaning to it. You give me the punch in the face translates to all different cultures. He also has a different saying too, where
it's true. This is exactly is like word by word right now.
No, I'm quoting Dana White on this, but you look at a blacktop. There's four corners. One corner you got kids playing baseball. One corner you got kids playing basketball. The third corner you have kids kicking a soccer ball around.
Yeah.
Okay. A fight breaks out in the fourth corner. Everyone comes and watches the fight. It's true.
That's deep.
It is deep.
That's Dana White.
That's Dana White. It's not me.
Completely ripping all of this.
No, it is.
It is pretty good stuff.
You can follow Dana White at Dana White on Twitter.
I don't think he needs any help from you for Twitter followers.
But hey, he's welcome to the show. You got an empty chair here.
No, but yeah, going to Japan, everything. That's all great for.
Who's gonna be in that card? Who do you think?
No, I mean they've got guys. Yushin Okami, who just lost to Anderson Silva, will most definitely be there. I think that Akiyama will be there. Takanori Gomes. I mean, so they've got notable Japanese fighters to just make this a card, just like they did in Brazil, putting so many Brazilian fighters and the local emphasis there.
Well, and exactly, and if Akiyama is on that fight, that's probably going to be one of his debut fights, or if not his second debut fight at welterweight, to the new weight class, which is adding these two weight classes has allowed these fighters to jump around. These more natural weight classes.
He's lost his last three fights looking for more of a competitive edge at a smaller weight class.
Yeah, he's way too small for middleweights. Way too small. So
break down the new weight divisions now. Obviously, that's
featherweight's at 145
right.
and bantamweight's 135. But featherweight, you got a guy like Kenny Florian who's actually fought for 2 lightweight titles already. So a third one is at a lightweight is out of reach. So he's able to drop the weight to 145, and now he's competing at 145, and eventually I see him getting a title shot against Jose Aldo. So by these fighters moving to these different weight classes, it kind of rejuvenates their career. If they've been losing or whatnot, it's that kind of fresh start, if you will.
And that's the same move that Ross Pearson's contemplating. He came out on Twitter. Of course, he lost to Edson Barbosa at UFC Rio, and he's talking about also moving to featherweight at 145 and competing there as well.
Well, and another former Ultimate Fighter alum here in Orlando, Jonathan Brookins, is officially doing the jump down to welterweight at 145. So you've got this welterweight division that is new, and a lot of the fighters there are WEC fighters. So these middle of the road, lightweight fighters for the UFC now are dropping down to this 145 pound, and it's going to make for an exciting division.
So, yeah, it's definitely going to be.
But the fight in Japan, just going back to that, I mean, it will be one of those next crossroad moments for the organization. The last time they were there, Tito Ortiz and Vanderlei Silva were on the card. So much has changed. It's a great place to go for the history of the sport. They're going to be at the Saitama Super Arena in Tokyo, which has a great legacy and pride in all the fights that were there. So there's a lot of history associated there in that particular building, and I expect them to do a lot in terms of honoring Pride. They bought Pride up and to kind of make that a big deal there.
Right, in Brazilians, Canadians, Japanese, I put them up there as the groups of people who really understand
And there's
MMA.
plenty of guys now in the UFC that at one point or another fought in promotions over in Japan like Pride, and so there's a lot of name recognition outside of just the Japanese fighters. Big Nog being an example of a guy that might be on schedule. These guys from UFC Rio almost on schedule again to fight in Japan, so he's another guy that has a lot of name notoriety over there and could be on that card.
Well, another guy, and this is all depending on what happens with this next title fight, is a guy like Rampage, who was a superstar in his Pride days in Japan. So that's another guy you could throw out there. And that's all depending on what happens with John Jones. But
right, that's key first. Do you think Japan would embrace it?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have in the past. The only thing that's different is I think that the UFC has struggled to sort of get a foothold in there in the past because of all the other promotions.
Like Pride,
but now that those aren't there as much
and they actually own Pride.
Not right, and not as prevalent. I think that they can kind of start to go in and build it a little bit. So it might be a little rough to start, but they're looking long-term, as I said.
For the audience that may not be as familiar with Pride, that might just be UFC fans, explain Pride. Obviously, the organization, it was one of the competitors once upon a time.
I mean, it certainly was. I mean, you had guys, as we talked about it, that were in there. I mean, you had some of the best in the world in Rampage Jackson. I mean, so many guys have fought in Pride over the years. And so it was a close competitor.
It was the premier mixed martial arts league in the world. The difference is that in Pride, the UFC, Pride was fought in a ring, and obviously Pride you could do some like knee kicks to the guy when he's down and whatnot. UFC's cleaned it up in that respect, but it used to be the premier mixed martial arts league in the world, and you got guys like Fedor and Dan Henderson and Overeem and Vanderlei Silva and Rampage and all these guys who made their career and made their start in Pride.
Shogun.
Anything they could have done to survive, or was this just eventually they?
It was really a thing where the UFC came over in 2007 and bought them up. I think originally there was a sort of that they might do some sort of merger type of thing, and more UFC events would be hosted in Japan. Then that didn't really happen. They started something called Dream. A lot of the former Pride people, and also K1's very big over there. The kickboxing is also a big thing there.
Yeah, and ultimately by that time in 2007, the UFC had already established itself in the world market.
And they started to pluck these guys that we're mentioning. Pride, I think, got maybe a couple years start, when the UFC was trying to sort of get their reorganization together and their rebirth. And so Pride got a little bit of a start, but as the UFC started picking off fighters, the product maybe got less appealing.
A lot of things were happening on behind the scenes. They were losing a bunch of money. And the thing with Dana White, how he's been, he bought the company, but they do serve as mergers. Mirko Krokop at the time, back in 2007, was Pride's big name, and he was the guy where hardcore fans were like, I want to see Krokop in the UFC. Boom, he made that happen when they bought Pride. So, it's for the fans who don't know about Pride, think of the UFC, a poor man's UFC before the UFC, if that makes sense.
Poor man's UFC before UFC. How about that?
It's fair enough.
Works for you, Carson?
That's fine.
Beautiful. So we got some minutes left here, because reminder, we'll be back next week. Big week next week. All right, we mentioned earlier in the previous segment, we're going to do a special ESPN1080.com Insiders boxing preview. We'll preview the Mayweather fight. Brian and myself will be involved in that with Jared Rudolph. Carson, not a boxing guy. He's just boycotting all boxing promotions.
I mean, I will probably watch those fights that matter, like with Pacquiao and Mayweather, but other than that, I really could care less about boxing, and I hope that it eventually goes away.
Well, it will. It has 12 rounds left.
You love that 12. We're going to get into that next week.
Mayweather and Pacquiao. Well, depending on how the fight turns out, it'll probably be a close decision because Mayweather's always in decision fights, and they'll probably make it a trilogy and make $100 million each, and then it'll be over.
I know our good friend Jared. That's going to be...
Is he gonna?
That's gonna be fun.
Okay,
that's all I can say.
That is gonna.
Well, I'd like to hear his rebuttal. I really would.
There will be rebuttal, my friend. Get ready.
You got way more than you need.
That's gonna be fun. But then this show, of course, round 3 back next week, and we got a big guest, don't we, Brian?
From the mothership, Mr. John Anik himself. So it'll be good.
The host of MMA Live on ESPN. It's on Friday nights, I believe, on the Deuce, and ESPN's expanded its coverage, and he's the face now of that.
He's the face. He does great work. You know, it's another step on making the sport more legitimate. Having an MMA Live, we have an NFL Live. You know, we have Major League, MLB Tonight. We've got everything. So MMA Live with John Anik, they do great work. You know, Stephen Bonner's on that show a lot. Kenny Florian, we talked about, on that show a lot. Rashad Evans, so it'll be great.
I'm glad you're pumping up Kenny Florian this week after last week.
And I don't like Kenny Florian that much.
I know you don't, but you're pumping him up this week.
Hey, he's a UFC superstar. He is. You got to give him that.
You just don't like his announcing, that's all.
And I don't like that he's from Boston.
Those are two different factors there.
That always does bother me, even though I like Kenny Florian. Yeah, it kind of eats at me.
John Anik next week, Carson.
Fired up.
That's going to be
huge.
Are
you, Carson? Are you fired up? All right,
of course. I love John Anik.
That's going to be great. So you're going to want to tune in right here at ESPN1080.com all week for your MMA news, all your round 3. It'll be up on YouTube. Check it out. Send your comments. Brian, where can I hit you last time?
At ESPN Dub on Twitter.
Beautiful.
Get at me.
Thanks, Brian. For Carson, great job, Carson.
A lot of fun. Always.
I'm Eric Lopez, and this has been another edition of ESPN1080.com's Round 3 here on ESPN 1080 The Team.
ESPN Radio 1080 The Team.